that the right? Oh, I said I was going to take a headset and then I didn't. Sorry, Ben. My mistake. I remember before the service, back when I was at Eltham Baptist, back in Eltham Baptist days, there was a worship service, and it was in an evening, I think, and we had the kids, and the kids were running around, and they're a bit younger back then. And Evie would have been about two and a half, not a lot of language, maybe a bit younger even. And they just kind of toddle around and rule the back of the church while we're kind of setting up. And we had a big worship team for this particular one. And they'd done their rehearsal, and so we'd all kind of gathered in a big circle up the front before the service. So the lights were a little bit dim, some music playing in the background. We sat down in this circle together, and we prayed. And we prayed. We didn't pray for that long, but we went around. A couple of people shared, about their heart for the service. And we were really feeling quite united and connected in God and in the service. And we felt really ready to bring what we had and to see what God would do. And we finished up the prayer and we opened our eyes, and standing in the middle of the circle was Evie holding a $50 note. And everything else kind of disappeared in the question of this 2-year-old standing very confidently holding a $50 note that certainly we didn't give her. And so the questions arose. This morning, it's the second week of Advent, and I thought we'd spend some time talking about peace, which is what the kids are looking at as well as the second aspect of Advent. And when we look at the world around us and the joy and also the peace, thank you, Ari. She wanted to stay in to make sure the story was told correctly. Now she's gone to kids' church. Similarly, it demands an answer to the question of why is the world the way that it is? We can have our directions and our focus and all these things, but things come up in life that demand an answer from us, that say things aren't simple and straightforward. There's more to this. There's a question that needs to be answered about what it means to live well, to have a society that thrives, to have peace. And I think in a sense, we've missed the picture about peace a lot when we talk about it. There's a lot to it, and there's different ways that it can be understood. But how would you define peace? When you hear the word, what comes to mind? I think we often think about maybe ceasefire in war, when the shooting stops and people stop attacking each other and hitting each other and the rest of it. I might now and then be known to have exclaimed, "Can I please just have 5 minutes of peace," when the kids are hitting each other or throwing things or in trouble. It's a quietness. The peace in the car when the kids have fallen asleep, maybe, There's inactivity, maybe rest, are all things that we associated with the idea of peace. People in their lanes, not making waves, no conflict. Throughout history, humanity has chased the illusion of this kind of peace, the absence of conflict. The Romans did a pretty good job of sorting it out through power and control. In many senses, I remember when I studied politics at university, they'd say the role of the government is to bring security and stability and peace. They did a pretty good job of it. Philosophers like the great Greek philosophers, they did a magnificent job of reflecting deeply on coming up with ideals and philosophies of understanding the shape and the angles of things to try and figure out how does it all work? How does it all kind of line up so we can sort it out and we can get rid of all these disjointed arguing and chaos. In more modern society, we think about the Industrial Revolution and coming up through, we've had a much more practical sense of how we approach the question of how to make society thrive. The promise of Star Trek, you know. By technology, we can kind of figure it all out, have things lined up. We won't need money anymore. We'll get rid of war because we'll have sorted it out. We'll know how things are. We can measure stuff properly and it'll all line up. And there's problems in the rest of the galaxy, otherwise the show would be boring. But the point is we can sort it out if we measure it, if we quantify it through enough testing and sorting it through. We often think that peace is about finding this personal comfort. But none of these have obviously succeeded. And none of these have offered what the gospel message of peace offers. In fact, it's quite a stark contrast. I often think it was not without intention that Jesus was born when he was. In a sense, it feels scandalous. The very fact that Jesus and the question that was answered happened in a particular place. It happened in a physical time and place in human history. It seems such a small and directed thing to have happened, to be such a big thing directed into this particular time. But I think there was intentionality to that time as well. In the world that Jesus was born into, there was an amazing level of new society and peace. Under Caesar Augustus, the Roman Empire was broad and uniquely stable. It was called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. They were broad, they sprawled out across. They'd brought under them all sorts of different cultures and peoples. They had powerful armies. They had solid politics that, even had a radical new level of engagement and, understanding of corruption. They had philosophers who were speaking into that space. They had peace through taxes and peace through soldiers and peace through all these things. And it was a radical time of this new era. As Jesus was born, there was a census being conducted, a meticulous measuring out and understanding of each person and their place across it. It was a demonstration, really, of Caesar's power and dominion and the capacity of Rome. And in the midst of this little family had to kind of shift around it to get to their right spot. And here, a baby was born out of wedlock to refugees in a stable. And they called him the Prince of Peace. But his peace didn't look anything like the best pictures that had been put forward. He didn't gather military generals like Caesar did, had them underneath himself to make sure they were all aligned towards his purpose. He gathered up uneducated fishermen. He didn't launch publicity campaigns, to try and reshape the paradigm about how things were and the new movement towards a peace and unity like Caesar did very successfully. He spoke from hillsides and boats in what often seemed to be obtuse parables and similes and things that he said himself many people will not understand. They can't. When accused before the magistrate, false witnesses, he was silent. When questioned, he returned it for other questions. I suppose politicians do that. But not to meet the agenda in the person talking to them, but to avoid it. He embraced the marginalized, not the powerful, the sick, the disabled, criminals, prostitutes, people that that religion themselves had set aside, people like eunuchs or the bleeding woman. This was a world, in a sense, with its best foot forward, presenting its best face in the Roman Empire. An empire that many societies have sought to emulate or evoke throughout history. And yet, against this, Jesus revealed how far they were from true peace. So we asked the question about what is peace. So what is this peace? Has anyone got any ideas about the word peace as it's used? Where does it come from? What's the original word use? Anyone know? Darn. All right. I'll make something up then. No. The Greek, they had this word irene that was used often, but it evoked often this word shalom, shalom or shalom, or however you like to say it. This idea, which is a bigger and a deeper word. Was someone offering a proper pronunciation there? Shalom. I'm just going to say it how I say it. You're going to have to find your own shalom about it. That's right. There's this shalom is a deeper thing. It evokes much more than that. And there's a lot that talks about this. Shalom is about wholeness, when the flock is all back together and restored, there was a shalom. When all the tents were set up and people were there in the same way. It talks about in 1 Kings 5, it's got this bit where Solomon has taken over, he's become the king. And Hiram, the king in Tyre, I think it is, no one's correcting me. I think it was he sends this message going, all right, I had a good relationship with your dad. What's it going to be like now? Okay? How's things going to go? And Solomon sends this letter of relationship saying, you know what? I want to build into this. We can work well together. I want to build the temple, and you guys have got the best cedar and the best workers. I'm going to pay them whatever you say. We're going to work together. And he establishes this relationship. And, the other king receives the letter and he goes, this is a wise king. We can work this together. You've been blessed. And it says they establish a treaty and they establish a shalom between them. They're not just not fighting. They've built a wholeness between them and a unity. A stone block that didn't have cracks or chips on it was considered whole as well. There's a sense in which it's about, in a sense, yes, perfection, balance. But one of the words that I find evokes it best for me is this idea of wholeness. Wholeness is about more than just perfection, but it's about something being complete. And we can see that now without things needing to be meticulously complete or perfect. Shalom as a verb, to bring shalom to a situation is to bring reconciliation. To build up, to restore relationship, not just to fall asleep fighting in the back of the car so there's quiet. And there's a hard reality that comes along with this. And that is that true peace is a lot of work. The life that's lived trying to create shalom, wholeness, peace, is probably not going to be a stable, quiet, and comfortable kind of a life. We're tempted to take the other definition and to manufacture our own sense of what are the rules that we can live by, what's the way that we can set up to live life that will achieve a thriving and a peace and a wholeness, and set that up on our own terms and kind of sort it through in the same way that different cultures have in history. The church does the same thing. How often can we rely on a comprehensive enough theology, a doctrine that ticks every box, That we have the church that runs with the right rituals at the right pace, doing the right things, sitting in the right order, with the right people coming along. We do have a nice, a peaceful church. We don't want a chaotic church either. But as they say, faith without actions are dead. None of these are doing the work of creating peace and the kingdom in and of themselves. When we look to the Prince of Peace, Jesus, and what he says, I look to one of the most evocative and I think uncomfortable passages in the Beatitudes where Jesus is saying along these same lines, what does it look like for this wholeness to move towards these things? Well, you've heard your paradigms too. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Justice, right? That's peace. It's all level again. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. If someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to march 1 mile, march 2 miles with them. Give to the one who asks. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You've heard it said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Tax collectors do that. If you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than everyone else? The pagans do that. Be perfect, whole, peaceful, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is a much more demanding picture of peace. This, you might argue, is a peace that requires all that we have, that requires grace and wholeness and following God into some treacherous places, going beyond the status quo. I was thinking about, in the next slide, in politics, you often see a unity and a connection between politicians, especially in the same party. The next one. I think I've got the slides in the wrong order. Thanks, Judy. And the next one after that. This is just a teaser for you. That's the one. Thank you. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court justices, famously close friends, despite being on the absolute opposite ends of the political spectrum in terms of their philosophies, in terms of their ideals. They were completely oppositional, and yet they had a friendship, and they would go on holidays with their families together. And it became something of a myth and a legend. It was this strange thing where these people with oppositional political views and ideas still saw beyond that to the person. I think there's a certain risk that comes with even that kind of a thing. Could you go back to now? When we were in Liverpool, when we were in the UK, we went and we actually saw this statue that's there. And does anyone know what it commemorates? Yes, very good. 3 points, Jeff. The Christmas truce in 1914. World War I, bitter war. In the snow, in the trenches, amidst the fighting, truces broke out. People started to calling over in the quiet of the night on Christmas. They'd call from one trench to the other, the English and the Germans, Merry Christmas, they were calling out. And then they started to do some caroling. They started to sing. And both sides joined in, singing carols together. And after that, after a bit more calling out, some of them popped out and headed up and over. And you can see it's the only photo that I know of that they've got of it, swapping gifts and stories. And it's even said that they played a couple of matches of football in no man's land together before the next day when they climbed back into the trenches and started shooting again. But in the midst of this chaos and the battle, there was more than that. It took courage. It took an extension beyond themselves, not just a ceasefire. It wasn't just a stopping of shooting, but to climb up and to extend themselves beyond that. And it didn't just happen in one spot, but it happened in multiple places all the way across the line. It suggested that over 100,000 soldiers were engaged in different levels across the line of this moment, this peace, this Christmas peace. It goes beyond the expected. I recall in my days back at university, we had one particular university lecturer, and I think I've shared this story before, who would talk about history, and they would harp particularly on the evils of the church and the damage done by missionaries and the damage of the faith. It was a huge class, of course. I think there were more than 150 people, in the lecture. It was one of kind of the foundational lectures, but it was a point where if Christianity came up, it was shared in a negative light. Some of the Christians that I knew in the class found this quite difficult. There was some talk about putting a complaint in or something about that. There's certain, discrimination policies that have come up in the uni, and we thought, well, here's a chance to kind of turn it and use it for good. But it was decided not to do that. We thought, let's be peaceful and we'll kind of carry on through it. I ended up being in her tutorial group, and she would lead the tutorial group. We developed, something of an amicable relationship. And I remember following one particular tutorial group. One guy was having a rough week. I don't know where his head was at, but he just had an outburst, and he yelled at her, kicked over a chair, and he stormed out. Of course, the whole group went quiet. I can't even remember what we were discussing at the time. But he stormed out, and she was sitting there kind of ashen-faced, and she kind of stumbled through the last little bits of the tutorial group and then finished it a bit early, and we all kind of filed out. And I thought, I could go in and say, partly it's her tone, that's kind of causing some of this stuff, but I thought, I'm going to leave it. Let's find some peace, I walked, and I headed out. And as I was heading out, I got that feeling that maybe you've felt before, that awful feeling where the Spirit of God is saying, actually, there's something more that's needed here. And I remember pacing around, and the sense that I got was, you need to go and check up on her. I thought, she's got like 150 people in her class. She's got other staff on support here. Why on earth would it be me who does this, And so I'm pacing around trying to come up with, and she's like a pretty high up, well-recognized professor, and I'm this first-year kind of Christian kind of kid in the class who's not getting the best marks. Anyway, eventually I relented and I headed up. I remember I was so embarrassed. I thought I'll come up with some kind of excuse for being there, some joke to break. I went down and I bought a little Boost bar. It was like a 50-cent one. I thought you needed a boost, and I thought that'll make it less awkward. That'll make it funny. And anyway, turns out the Holy Spirit's plan did not need any augmenting. It did not need any support. And I recognised that gratefully once she opened the door. I tucked it in my back pocket. But I said, I just wanted to check in, make sure that you're okay. Immediately she invited me in. She said, sit down, and we talked about that for a moment, and she asked also, I really appreciate you coming up and checking in. So what are you studying? And I was doing a double degree there. I wasn't just doing the history, I was also doing theology at the same time. So I said, I'm actually doing arts, history, looking at English, and I'm also doing a theology degree at the same time. And so she shared a bit about her history growing up and her experience with the church and some really difficult things that had happened in her experience of church. And then as she'd left and she'd gone out and attended university and her further experiences and where she stood at the moment. And this time I was kind of sitting there kind of hoping not to have any boost moments come up, just kind of trying to listen quietly and offer what I could. And she talked, and worked through. And anyway, she said thank you. She gave me a signed copy of one of her books or something like that, to take. And then she sat, and I remember thinking, okay, great, I've survived this. I've done it. I've done my mission. I can get out of here. And and as I was kind of finishing up, she leant back on her desk and she said, I'm pretty unfair, I think, really. I've been a bit unfair on the church in the way that I do my lectures. It's probably been pretty skewed. I probably need to have a think about, the way that I kind of share and think and articulate these things and consider a bit more. And again, I was just sitting there silently, just kind of holding my breath, And I said, I'm glad to hear you say that, if you ever want to talk about it or something like that, And that was that. And I was off, and I was in the hallway with a Boost bar for me to eat. And it was incredible. But this was my attempt at peace was, I'm not going to argue, I'm not going to put in a complaint. And I didn't even have to contribute much. It was just the obedience of turning around and entering into that situation and trusting. And I didn't say anything. I didn't bring up the lecture. I simply answered the questions in a flat way. But God was ready to work peace in a wholeness. There was a building up there. There was a building up in her story. And there was a building up of the way that lectures for hundreds of kids as she lectured going forward would move forward. And I don't know what the rest of her story was. I trust that as well. In Advent, we are called In the mission to peace, we are called to something radical. And as we look at the life of Christ, who we follow, if we say that his life was a life of peace, of building peace, then we know we don't get the opportunity to sit and enjoy the peace of our own comfort and quiet and stability. But we're called in obedience to a peace that transforms. Not just to receive peace, but to become carriers of peace, to bring restoration to our relationships, to our communities, to our hearts. And again, not by what we do, but by the grace that we receive, the transformative peace that we have received going through us. It's not something we achieve and get and settle on. It's a gift that we receive and actively continue to share. From the beginning of time, humanity has sought peace. But the peace we need isn't something that we manufacture. It's a gift from the Prince of Peace. For he is our peace. My peace I give to you. He was born to bring restoration to a broken world. And we, as his ongoing body, are called to bring wholeness and restoration to the world. This Advent, let's open our lives to this shalom, this peace and wholeness around us. Let's not fall into the trap of judging the cracks around us from where we sit in amidst our own peace. But as Christ did, we're called, enter into it. Confront the brokenness and pain that Jesus calls us into as it appears before us. Peace on earth, not through silence, but through the mission of peace. I'd like to spend a bit of time now in prayer. I think this is something I'd like to do a bit more in this coming year, a year that we have decided that we want to endeavour to spend on our knees before God. I thought I'd allocate a bit of time now and there for us to spend praying individually, coming before God, and then coming communally before God. So as we consider peace and restoration, as we look around at what are the things that God has put us in, what's our context? Who are the people we're anticipating seeing? Who are the neighbours that we've got maybe who we've got peace with it, but it's a ceasefire, or the family members, the places where we've got peace, but we're called to greater humility or to offer more first. So I'll spend some time now praying, coming before God on our knees and asking him if there's peace that he's calling us to work at and to enter into individually. And then I might spend some time praying for us together and for our world for peace, as we're called to do. So I'll spend some time, I'll open it up, and then I'll spend some time for us independently to come before God. And again, when I talk about coming on our knees, it is about humility before God, kneeling before God in our heart, open and alert to what he's saying. Though you're welcome to kneel as well if you'd like to. There's no rules against that.